we sort of have this process on the design team, which we've used from LBP1 and LBP2 and now Tearaway, which is very much based around creating small, we call motifs of gameplay. And it could be like an LBP, it may have just been a whole bunch of very small sections of level or area, which were just about like what you could do when you were grabbing one of the Hessian blocks. Or it could have been about swinging or about the grapple hook. And the designer would go off and they would kind of jam on that idea and come up with all the ideas that they could, and using that sort of constraint and that theme. And the way we sort of build from there is we look at that library of things we've got, and from that we start to sort of construct. Well, number one, we figure out like which of those are actually fun. With LBP, what we were also trying to do a lot of the time is really show off the novelty of the tools. So it would be like, does that sort of show off what you can do enough, or does that show off like, how tactile things are? Or for Tearaway, it's been, we spent a lot of time doing motifs to do with the Vita and how we got the most out of that. So that game is very much about bringing the real world into the Vita, and into the real world into the game, and the game into the real world. So we're using things like on the back touch, when you press it, we've got fingers that come into the game world. And that's actually so we had a lot of like motifs of like, well, how do you use that, and how does a character? So once we have the motifs built, and we've decided which of those we think are good, and we've kind of gone through that process, we sort of then start to construct like how that may lay out over the course of a game. And then we start to do like the narrative and visual integration with those areas. But we start very much from a feel perspective of like what feels good. And I think that's the thing that we all often, the mistake that we can all make sometimes as games makers is not nailing that, and sort of thinking, oh, but when we have the this and the that and the this, it will all feel great. And actually, it won't. Or it will. And if it's going to, spend the time now doing it, prove it now, instead of like putting it off, because often that's where we have had, not so much, I wouldn't say burnt, it's just that sometimes you take a risk and you're like, we're not going to do those, we just think it's going to get there. And sometimes that risk pays off, and often it doesn't. And I know for sure, for me, it's now a very important thing of, if we feel that this particular piece of gameplay and this motif or this feeling is the most important thing, we're going to construct the whole game around that, then let's get all of the things that are needed to make that work.